The Jets need to make the most of a crappy situation with Rucker and McGroarty. Can Winnipeg once again turn a loss into a win? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But, of course, the most important thing is that we just love and appreciate your support. Well, tonight's episode, in the wake of all of the drama and all the fun stuff ahead of, this coming week for the Jets, it's been a little bit of a painful situation, right? Obviously, the whole Rucker McGroarty thing has been a real downer. And I think, the comments on the last episode and a lot of the angst, it's kind of sounding like a lot of us are pretty pissed off about it. It's been not the most fun. I think the last 24 hours, there's been lots of really unhappy people, myself included. I think we're all kind of like, WTF is happening. And, there's been some real angst directed at the way of Rucker, at the way of the Jets, and at the way of, the NHL. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Winnipeg turning losses into wins, because when it comes to situations like this, where the Jets have their backs against the wall and they have to produce some sort of miracle, this has usually been something the Jets have actually been good at. I don't know why Winnipeg is uniquely decent at making the most out of rotten lemons. You talk about making lemonade, and the Jets have not only made lemonade, they've made like huge batches of it. Just think about the Dubois trade and how that really reshaped the entire face of the franchise. But, the amount that you want to keep doing that, I think, is very debatable. You don't want to find yourself in these situations repeatedly like the Jets have been. I think it's not a great place. Obviously, for a variety of reasons, Winnipeg has sort of ended up in this spot, and I think it's not a place that they should continually find themselves. So I want to talk about that. I want to address a couple of comments that I also saw, in relation to this, whether I really feel the AHL is a great development spot and all that fun stuff. Before we dive into that real quick, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. If you've ever dreamed about being your own NHL GM and running the Winnipeg Jets, well, now you can with Ultimate Hockey GM. It's completely free, and Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the in-game store. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on your favorite app store. Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty now. Like I said, so a couple of comments I saw in the last episode that I wanted to take some time to talk about real quick before we dive into the whole losses and the wins bit. The first is, there was an interesting comparison to the situation with Kyle Connor. And somebody said, well, Kyle Connor sharpened up at the AHL level and, he came back and turned into a routine NHLer. Why shouldn't, Rucker McGroarty? And I think that there's been some interesting thoughts over whether that, short stint for Connor really did that or not, right? He didn't play a ton of games for the Manitoba Moose. He had a short stint, relatively speaking. Overall, he spent 56-ish games with Manitoba. So that's less than a full season. And I think with what we saw then, my general feeling was like, I don't think being sent down was what really turned Kyle Connor, his whole career around. Obviously, he had a bit of a slower start the first, 20 odd games, but that's pretty typical for most NHLers. I think the biggest thing is sure, if you go down to the AHL level, you can build up your confidence and get up to speed. I'm not sure that it was the most important part for Kyle's development, though, right? And when you have a lot of players these days who come in with a really high skill barrier compared to players that maybe came in around the time that Kyle joined the NHL, which is crazy to say, right? He came in, 2016, 2017-ish. And since then, the skill barrier has gotten even higher. And so I think in a lot of ways, the AHL could be a productive place for folks to get dip their feet in if they've never become an NHL or if they've never been in a pro league before. But I think when you look at a player like Rucker, he honestly might be good enough as he is to join the NHL and actually make an impact. And I don't think he would have had a prime top 6 spot the way that a lot of us wanted Kyle to be immediately. Rucker probably would start on like the third line, and I think that would be a relatively insulated place alongside Lowry. And what I think has frustrated me is that we're not even getting that chance because Rucker, to some capacity, was told, he's not really going to even get a chance to fight for an NHL spot. And that, I think, is not really the way that you should approach it. It should be a situation where you start off with the premise that he has a chance, and then if it doesn't work, then you can send him down, right? Like, don't tell him right off that it's not going to work. But it makes me wonder what happened already. Was it like a really personal thing? Did somebody cross the line and say something? The fact that this was the main sticking point's a little odd to me. So I'm curious to know what really went down behind closed doors. It is what it is. Another comment I saw is if the Jets should trade with the Islanders for, a big package, including a top prospect, pool lock, and a first. And, I don't hate that. I think the Jets could probably do a little bit better in solving the D and the center issues. I think there's going to be tons of suitors for McGroarty, probably a good 8 to 10 teams. I think that's a pretty sizable pool. I think a lot of teams really should be interested in him. And, it's not a locale thing that is pushing him away from signing with Winnipeg. So, in terms of that stuff, he's probably happy to play almost anywhere. I think it's just a question of actually getting a chance to fight for an NHL spot. So I think Winnipeg might be able to do even better than that package, which it's a good one, right? But of course, you also included Ehlers. I think, in my mind, if you're sending both players somewhere, you probably want younger roster kids who have a lot of potential coming back. I saw somebody propose like David Jiricek and Kent Johnson in one trade with Ehlers, and of course McGroarty going the other way. That, I think, Columbus would say no, but perhaps something in a similar vein where you've got some guys who are maybe a little bit down on their luck. Maybe there's some frustration setting in. A fresh start could be exactly what they need. Maybe that is a similar kind of swap that you could be looking at. Although with Ehlers, he just doesn't have a ton of value because he's an expiring, aging asset. So I think that is a real consideration, but maybe some team really loves him. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting one to see shake out. Now, in terms of, Winnipeg coming out on top here, one thing I will say, and it kind of speaks to the history of the Jets' recent trading patterns, is that, like I've said, when it comes to these trades, they've generally done really well. They have had some great results. Winnipeg has kind of lucked out in a lot of ways. I think, the Dubois trade has been one of the best in Jets history, and it really came out of, a position that looked like it was a very weak spot for the Jets to be in, and yet somehow they came out with a huge haul. They came out with several roster players, a great young player in Gabriel Velarde, who looks to be, even better than Dubois is. And I think to myself, McGroarty might get you an even cooler package in terms of a lot of people really fighting and clamoring for this kid's signature. I don't know if it's going to be quite on the same level of volume as that trade was, but in terms of quality of assets, you might get some really great stuff. And I think Winnipeg has a unique position to look at the roster chart and roster situation and resolve some issues. Like, Winnipeg doesn't have a lot of top-end center talent. They don't have a lot of top-end D talent in the pipeline. I don't want to say that this is a good thing. I think the circumstances around the whole situation are ungood. I think it's very bad that Winnipeg is looking at a prospect who has seen how the Jets have handled their own prospects, and that's kind of pushing him away. But this is also a scenario where, I don't really mind if the Jets trade McGroarty. Just make sure that you come out of this deal looking at a position that you have a real lack of depth in, and you address it. And I think that this trade could benefit, both parties in that respect, where the team that gets McGroarty gets a huge locker roomy, captainy, great player with a ton of talent, and the Jets kind of work to solve some of their lack of top end players in other spots. And so, like I said, I think the Jets have done well traditionally in resolving these issues. It'd be interesting if they look at like a Zegras kind of return. I've seen people talking about all sorts of players. I even see some supposed rumor from who knows about a package with the Blackhawks, which, yikes. I don't really think that that's a particular thing, but it's interesting, right? I mean, you could basically go in any direction that you want, whether it's to the Islanders, maybe for a top D. Maybe you're looking at, something with the Flyers. I think the Ducks could be an intriguing one because the Ducks have plenty of futures, and they're probably looking for a big captainy sort of player to join their roster and help lead the future. But again, like I said, Winnipeg, I would imagine, wants a little bit more immediate help, especially with Hellebuyck not getting younger. So this is a big decision point, and I think it leads into a huge week for the Jets coming over the next few days. And we'll talk about kind of what I expect Winnipeg to walk away from this doing over the next few days in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, just wanted to shout out our friends and partners from earlier at Ultimate Hockey GM. Locked On Jets fans, I want to take a moment to bring up one of our partners that I think you'll really enjoy. Ultimate Hockey GM lets you live out your dream of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise. If you think you can run the Jets better than Shovel Day Off, well, your dream can finally come true. Ultimate Hockey GM lets you live out your fantasy, and you can manage every strategic aspect of your team, playing through the seasons, leading into Stanley Cup glory, and it comes down to hiring the right coaches and staff, trading players for draft picks, and navigating through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Jets fan, there's no offseason. GMs are constantly making tons of tweaks and moves. Everyone is making lots of big splashes in the free agency and trade market, and that's your chance to really express your love for the game and help make the Winnipeg Jets the best team in the league. Best of all, Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable offline, playable on the go, and as much as you want to, when you want to. And best of all, Locked On Network listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store. Make sure to check that out. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on your favorite app store. Ultimate Hockey GM. Start your dynasty today. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about some tough decisions for the Jets, some big weeks ahead. Obviously, this coming week for Winnipeg is probably one of the biggest in recent memory, which every year we seem to say that. I don't think this is quite as big as last offseason, but look, a Rucker McGroarty trade for a lot of reasons holds tremendous implications for Winnipeg's upcoming season and beyond. So if ever there was a huge week for the Jets to really nail a trade, this is going to be one of them. And again, like I said, they did really well with the Dubois trade. So I'm feeling relatively optimistic. But of course, lots of stuff heading into draft week. And I think if you're the Jets, you want to make sure that you are setting yourself up in a really good spot to deal with the present and future, especially your lack of depth either down the middle or on the back end. Is this a week that you might be able to resolve that? Well, we're going to find out real soon. Before we talk a little bit about what I could see happening this week, just wanted to let you know that for all of you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers, if you find yourselves having to turn on the volume because there's too much shouting, you should make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, this week for the Jets is a super intriguing one because the Jets are going to balance a mixture of things, right? Whether it's going for the future, perhaps, or maybe working on the present. And obviously, the Jets don't have a lot of draft picks in this upcoming draft, which for the Jets is not the worst outcome. I do think it means that you're going to have to really rely on some really deep scouting. Although, like I said on the last episode, our whole draft and develop thing doesn't always make that much of a difference when we haven't always developed players to make the NHL. Hence the whole McGroarty situation. So, for that, that's a bigger, longer term problem. And I want to talk about that a little bit later in the episode. But right now, I think the most important thing for the Jets is to try and find some genuine roster talent that can kind of impact Winnipeg's present, right? I think McGroarty is maybe like a 2-year away kind of player from being a really high impact quality guy. Not that he's not going to do it as early as this season, but I think the most likely scenario is that he becomes really good in a couple of seasons. So if the Jets want to kind of swing, right, a lot of players are sort of at an RFA status, and with their respective teams, there's been some debate about, getting a contract done. And I'm looking at Nietzsche's. Zegras has kind of been falling out of favor. There's a lot of players like that right now that the Jets could potentially take a swing on. Now, a lot of them come with some real cosmetic flaws, whether it's a lack of defensive awareness, maybe some struggles with individual chance creation, different stuff like that, right? Some of these guys might be more of the Monahan type where they need some help to generate really high-quality chances, but they also bring some great finishing talent on their own. And for the most part, these guys are all great skaters. So maybe this is a chance where Winnipeg comes away kind of looking better than they did, coming into this offseason, taking a big swing on a risky player that perhaps has some issues with their current team, but in a more supportive environment, maybe with better talent around them, they could really start to blossom. Zegras, I think, always sticks out because he has like tremendous scoring talent, and despite having a rough season this year, I mean, this guy's already put up like multiple 60-point seasons. Yeah, you might kind of look at him as like a bit of a Kyle Connor, and I think that's kind of where I'm at with him, but he's still really good. He's still really skilled, and maybe joining the Jets would unpack a little bit more of the talent that he has naturally. And I think Nietzsche is also in a very similar situation where if you can help him get to the front of the net and get to that crease area, he will punish the puck. He's a great shot. He's got really good spatial awareness. And again, he might have some like empty calorie scoring sort of issues, but it's hard to also look at that production and not think that you could still make something out of it, right? Whether you're scoring on the power play or something, or you're creating at 5v5, those points do still matter, right? It's maybe, something to look at in terms of supporting that line with teammates like maybe Perfetti, who can help create a defensive presence, who can really offer transition skill. But there is something to be said for helping Winnipeg find some really skilled finishing, especially at center, right? Like we've got Scheifele, but other than that, most of our centers tend not to be really big points getters. So maybe Nietzsche, maybe Zegras, maybe somebody else could solve that. The Jets might also try and get a big right-handed D. Maybe they look at Jakob Chychrun from the Sens. Maybe that's something that Winnipeg explores, because like Ottawa would probably be looking for like a big leadership kind of player. I don't quite know what Ottawa's whole situation is, but maybe a guy who is a future captain would be really appealing to them. Somebody who's not that far away and could become easily one of their biggest leaders, both on the ice and in the locker room. Maybe that's a really appealing package. I think for a lot of coaches and managers and front offices, they probably would love to have somebody like McGroarty on their team, somebody who's going to be wearing that C, who can really lead the team forward. Maybe it's like a Columbus-y sort of situation where you look at Jiricek or something of that nature, and you can kind of facilitate that trade. I think Winnipeg has a lot of options, but I think they can probably target a roster player now, maybe somebody that, just has, they have a demonstrated track record of success at other levels, but maybe it just hasn't clicked yet at the NHL level because the team that they're on sucks. I think in a lot of ways, a lot of great NHL talent gets buried by being on very poor rosters with a really terrible and toxic environment. Not necessarily because all the guys around them are really awful or something, but just because the team loses a lot, right? You take out guys like Hurdle out of San Jose, and look, they start to really hit it off in Vegas. So maybe this is one of the scenarios where the Jets can really bring in a good roster player who can be a fun player this coming season. Finding a center, I think, would be really helpful for A, kind of avoiding the Monahan pitfall, and B, also giving us a 1-2 punch next season that the Jets really haven't had in a while consistently. We're really lacking another Scheifele type, because like if you're not going to have a McDavid, well, maybe you should have two Scheifele's. Maybe you can make something out of that pairing that really gets you going. And I think if you had a 1-2 punch of Scheifele Zegras or Scheifele Nietzsche or Scheifele whoever, hey, you're probably looking like a pretty fun team in the upcoming season. But the nice thing about all of this is that the Jets have tons of choices and options, and I think a lot of people are going to be making offers. The fact that we've heard teams are inquiring with the Jets and not team, right? It's plural. For me, already suggests that there's some real movement, there's some real traction, and if the trade does happen this week, which it does kind of sound like it's likely, we might have a really cool, fun player to look forward to in the upcoming season that maybe doesn't sell tickets right now, but they start hitting it off once they hit the ice for the Jets in a few months. Things start to look a little bit different, and maybe we can get that enthusiasm back. Because right now the vibes are definitely pretty poor, but I don't think it would take much for folks to really warm up to a young, skilled player who's going to come here and really have something to prove. Maybe they're pissed off. Maybe they're like, you know what, this is not how I wanted things to go, but I'm ready to make my mark. And if they do it for the Jets, kind of like Vilardi did, hey, you know what? I think we could end up looking at a real winner of a situation down the road. Maybe we're all laughing in a few months like, can't believe we were ever worried about this. The guy that we got in exchange was fantastic. So want to be optimistic here. I think that this is, like I said, a great opportunity to turn rotten lemons into something better than just lemonade. But of course, it's going to take some real thought, and I think we're going to have a big decision to make in the next few days as we get closer to the draft. I would prefer not to have to draft a top prospect again. I think going that route for me feels a little bit like sliding backwards, because if you draft somebody, the odds that they're going to be NHL ready anytime soon is low. So Winnipeg kind of needs to prioritize, I would say, roster talent here, and talented young roster talent, not just anyone. Let's try and build for the present and future. So lots of fun stuff, but sort of on a less happy note, I do want to talk about whether the Jets have really moved forward yet, because I think this whole McGroarty situation, it does ask a lot of questions about where Winnipeg's mindset is and if they've actually moved forward like they kept telling us they were going to this past offseason. We're going to talk about that in just a quick moment. But before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about, some interesting concerns to have about this Jets team going forward. I would say, with all the McGroarty stuff, there's been a lot of angst and frustration, and I think I feel it too, but part of me also has sort of looked at the situation, and it's like, well, you know what? If you're really not going to be able to convince him to stay, well, then just make sure that whatever you get back in exchange is, going to help the Jets in the present and future. And I think Winnipeg is one of those teams that uniquely has done a good job of balancing that, right? Like that whole trade package for Dubois, I keep saying, really kind of ticked both boxes. And I think for a lot of us, it was like an amazing, amazing offer. And thank you, GM Rob Blake, for giving the Jets a huge, huge package for a player that I don't think any of us really expected to get anything for. So with that in mind, I want to turn our attention to one last topic before we close out. I sort of wonder if the Jets have really moved forward, right? We've heard talk from Scott Arniel about this team needing to change and modernize and not only become more data savvy, but just move forward in terms of the way it thinks about roster development and construction and in-game adjustments and stuff. And for me, this whole McGroarty situation kind of took place in April. So maybe the conversation sort of died there and maybe it just never resumed. And this was perhaps preceding Arniel. But the fact that it really hasn't changed since then, it concerns me a little bit, right? It does concern me. Winnipeg is one of those teams that really can't afford to have prospects walking away, especially top prospects like McGroarty. If anything, I mean, you can definitely come away on the right side of trades with them, and I think that's something that the Jets should honestly be more aggressive in doing. I think that there's a lot of value in trading from a position of strength and looking at some other options that can fill needs within your organization. But I think the general problem with the way that the Jets have had to do this is that they're getting a reputation, and it's something that we've talked about in previous seasons that we thought would eventually catch up with the team. The whole we don't always play prospects and we don't always get them into the NHL fast enough. That was a concern that we thought eventually would start to bear fruit. And I think this is one of the situations where it's really making a prominent impact on this team, and not in a good way. So, it's one of the scenarios where I ask myself, did the Winnipeg Jets really think through this whole situation? Did they imagine that this would be the outcome? Have they really considered what they've done wrong the last few years? Because I feel like this whole scenario is just repeating the same cycle that we've seen a lot with this team. Heinola has had to wait years for his chance to actually be an NHLer. Perfetti has kind of been, sporadically used. 10 minutes a night is just really not enough for a kid who's like 22 now, right? That's really not acceptable. And he showed really well at the end of this past season and somehow still kept getting scratched. So for me, I'm just like, I don't know what we're doing here, but it is what it is. Maybe Arniel is finally ready to change that. But if they don't figure out a way to really convince McGroarty to stay, I just wonder, if they're comfortable jettisoning him. Is this going to be a thing that the Jets keep doing over the next few years? I really hope not. My hope is that Winnipeg kind of figures out, this really has to be a one-off, right? This has to be one of the last times that we alienate a prospect and that he wants to leave, because we have to be a draft and develop team. We haven't been a draft and develop team thus far. Winnipeg has not been able to actually develop the prospects and get them into the NHL all that often. The last really big player who became a top-end guy was apparently like Kyle Connor, which I hadn't really thought about until recently. Winnipeg has certainly gotten some guys like Sandberg from later rounds and stuff, but beyond that, man, we just do not graduate prospects all that frequently, especially into prominent top, pairing roles or big top six roles. That's why I'm really hoping that this upcoming season starts to really shift that. Winnipeg is not a team that can afford to attract top-end free agent talent. They don't make big roster trades traditionally. And so if you're not doing either of those on a routine basis, well, you better be doing something well when it comes to your prospects. And for as good as the Jets can draft, they have not actually turned those guys into NHLers all that often. Like I said, I think that we're starting to see that shift, but McGroarty wanting to walk away doesn't make me feel like the front office has learned the right lessons yet. So let's hope that this is the last time for a long time that we really need to have this conversation. I think it's frustrating that we're here again, but you know what? Arniel does seem to be cognizant of this problem, and I think his push to make this team more data-centric and to really refocus how this team is built going forward does give me some optimism that we're going to see things turn around. But let's just hope that it stops costing us really good prospects, because I really thought that McGroarty was going to be the guy and somebody that would become a fan favorite for years to come. And maybe he still will. Maybe this will all blow over at the end of this week. But until then, we just need to buckle up and prepare ourselves for almost anything, because I think the Jets are in for a pretty gnarly next 7 to 8 days. But let me know how you're feeling about this week. Are you excited about it? Are you very nervous? Give me your thoughts and feelings about the whole McGroarty situation and how the Jets have handled it so far in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, obviously, is Game 7, and we should have some hopefully good thoughts on early findings from that game. But additionally, we'll probably talk about some of the trade rumors around McGroarty and see what really shakes out and what actually looks good. But like I said, for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. So as always, have a great night and go Jets go.